Welcome back to Naval Action and episode 47 of A Letter to the King. If you're new to the series or just hanging around waiting to come back into the game, this is my attempt to keep you up to date with what's going on PvP-wise on the Euro PvP1 server. Let's jump in and have a look at where we were this time last week. So fundamentally, most of the battles have been going on either around South America or Haiti. And this is where most of the pressure is on. Last week, the Brits managed to finally crack Trinidad after a whole bunch of turns, which really means the Swedes and the French have only got 2 ports left to defend on the South American coast. Orinoco region and Caracas. Elsewhere, there's been a lot of push and shove around Haiti, and of course Islamabad is regularly changing hands between the Spanish and the Americans. The alliances are pretty steady. I sort of declared last week I think the alliances bug is fixed, so the alliances are pretty much set in stone, and there seems to be no real expectation that these are going to change anytime soon. So let's have a look what happened this week. And it was an interesting week this week in that last week it seemed to be the week of boarding. There was so much boarding going on and it really did feel like it was the new meta. But I have to say this week 3 or 4 of the battles have been absolute crackers, and 3 of the big battles, and I'll go into these in more detail later on, had some really excellent tactics going on inside them. So we'll dive deep into 3 of the port battles this week. Now, as what is, I think, part of some sort of paint and blueprint exchange scam, the pirates once again had a crack at Port-au-Prince, where they failed to capture Port-au-Prince. This is an alliance of Swedes, French, and predominantly Danes who defend this area. And the pirates came back again for a second time in the week, and for a second time in the week failed. So there's 50 paint jobs and new ships to the alliance. Well done, everybody involved in that. The Americans had a go at a so-called night flip at Ponce. The Danes had quite an interesting fleet there. There was quite a few new clan names I saw in that one. And this was actually a cracking battle. It ended up being a good win to the Danish fleet. And again, it was a bit of a combination fleet. But it was a cracking biff. And really, I mean, I think this one's a 4th rate from memory. I don't think there was 1 million ships lost in this one from memory, but it was a good fight, and lots of individual scraps going on. But in the end, it was easily held by the French, Swedish, and Danish alliance. Also, on a strange timer, and this one was in the Aussie time zone. I don't really know how it got set, to be honest. It was a Dutch set flag. So a few Brits headed down here to see if our Dutch allies needed friends and help, and it was in the middle of the, like I say, the Aussie time zone. But there was very few folks, so we ended up going in 12 on the Aussie time zoners versus a full 25 first-rate fleet with screeners. So the testament here is that there's probably better French defences than there are Aussie attacks at this time of night, or at least that was true. I think this was effectively, I can't remember what day it was on, but it was like maybe a Tuesday, and it would have been around lunchtime in Europe, around 9 p.m. in Aussie town. Anyway, we got absolutely spanketated. I finally managed to get rid of my red-headed child, Santissima, slightly faster than a Martello tower in this particular biff. But yeah, it was like 12v25, and it was more paint and ships, really, to the alliance. Later on in the week, the Dutch came back for another go at Caracas, and I'll go through that in a lot more detail later on. Now, this also ended up being defended, but it was a far more intriguing fight. And again, this was full alliance. There was Brits in here as well, and there was the full French, Swedish, Danish alliance. I think there might have even been a couple of Spanish in there, remembering a couple of names I saw. And this turned out to be a cracking battle, and the French port was held. And we'll have a look at that battle in a little bit more detail later on. And later on, the Dutch then had a go at Les Cays, and this was defended by the French. And again, we're talking mixed alliances here. Now, from memory, I think this one was pretty much screened out. I think this is the one. One of them was screened out around here. So, again, another defence to the French alliance. So we move on to the Brits' third attempt at Orinoco. Now, Orinoco is a real bugger of a port to get into, and I'm going to look at this battle again in more detail a bit later on. Like I say, I want to dive into 3 of these battles because there are a lot of tactics involved. But the Brits turned up. The wind was favourable for the Brits. The screening was very well done. And the Brits got in, and to be honest, they marmalised the Swedish-French defence. But the main reason for that, we'll see in more detail, the wind was super favourable for the Brits. And I have to say, this is one of the best led attacks I've ever seen. And like I say, we'll go into that later on. The commanding officer here and the general intelligence of his fleet to maintain order was top. Everything worked for the Brits in this one, although the defenders were very much on a sticky wicket with the wind being the way it was. So the Brits have taken Orinoco. Hoorah! The Brits then attacked the south side of Cuba here at Santiago, or Trinidad de Cuba. Now, I'm not quite sure if this was a deliberate port set or if it's just a result of PvP in the area. But nonetheless, there was no port taken, so lots of paint for the pirates. And then the Americans came at Islamabad again. Now, this was on the American time zone, and I think 3 brave Spanish turned up to defend. So that was a gimme for the Americans. So the Americans have retaken Islamabad, and I think we're going to have some sort of relief day for the poor citizens of Islamabad who don't know what Deos it is, because 1 minute they're in the US and the next minute they're in Spain. This must be a very confused and somewhat befuddled bunch of locals in Islamabad. They probably have 2 flags and 2 sets of clothes in their closets, and they just look out the window and work out which one they need to wear and wave today. So the Americans took Islamabad. So those were there was 2 victories there. The Spanish now this was today, so I don't have any details, but the Spanish then attacked Ays. And I've not managed to speak to anybody yet who participated in that battle, but it was defended by the US, or at least by the Allies. And that was it. Now, I want to talk about 2 or 3 of the battles that happened this week, and just show you, if you've never been in a port battle, let me just sort of show you how it works. This is the inner circle, and this is the defending fleet. So this is Castries, which was held by the Brits, and it's been attacked by the French. And again, I stress, when I say it's held by it's a British flag, but you'll get Dutch, and on the odd occasion an American helping out here. And equally, although it was a French flag attacking, you'll get Swedes and Danes and Spanish. But this is how the port works. This inner circle is where the defenders can join. This outer circle, the attackers have to join from outside that circle. You have to capture at least 2 and ideally 3 of these circles to win capture points. And this red circle indicates, this is a big circle, so the big red circles indicate that there's a fort in the middle of the circle, and this is its firing arc, if you like. If there were smaller red circles, that means it's a tower. You can see here's the coastline, and that's the actual port proper. And this is the wind as best as I remember it. That might be slightly different. It could be a mirror image of this. This is as best as I recall. So in this particular battle, the French, with the wind, came in intending to take the circle on the east side. They may have had a couple of ships coming in here as well to try and snag this one up. And the Brits were in trouble a little bit because to get to this circle they have to sail it, to get to the enemy fleet and the fleet proper. They have to sail over here. And of course, as they sail over here, if the enemy have managed to enter a couple of ships on this side of the circle, they'll end up losing 2 circles. So the Brits very slowly moved to intercept the attacking force, and the attacking force made good headway and almost sort of got the best part of the way towards the British middle circle. But this was very much a plan that the Brits had. They, as the French came in, they turned their fleet so it was sailing in the same direction as the French. So the French now were biting at the buttocks of the British fleet, if you like. And what happened next was the Brits, and this is a tactic that this captain has used before, he split his fleet and slowed down and allowed the French vanguard, the front of their fleet, to essentially get between 2 lines. Now, in actual real life British Naval Tactics Handbook, this is one of the ideal ways to take on a ship of the line, and that is to put it in what's called a position of doubling. So the ship in the middle here, the front ship, so there was about 4 French ships, they weren't all French, they were Swedes and so on. About 4 French ships got caught in the middle of this, and essentially they were getting 2, or in one poor captain's case, 4 broadsides coming in. Now, of course, the ship that's in the middle here, it can fire on both sides, but it's only doing 1 broadside's worth of damage to each ship on either side, where it's receiving 2 broadsides of damage for the same reload time. And of course, that does more cannon damage, it can cause reload shock, and it can diminish crew capacity. It also means that your captain has to have the brown pants on, because as you're sailing essentially into a vice here, if you choose to turn and break out, you're going to have to sail through a line, you're going to have to expose your stern as you turn away, so that's going to cost, and you're going to have to come through the line, and that means now that you're depleted and biffed up, you could get boarded, or as happened, and you'll see this, so this one, there's a video up of this in the Nation channel. You'll see a couple of the ships try and move their way out of the line, and simply one of the British ships breaks line here and just puts himself hull to hull and steers this ship into the broadsides. Now, in the first big engagement here, 4 of the attacking ships were absolutely shredded. And although they didn't get sunk in that opening 5 or 6 minutes, they were essentially combat ineffectual. They tried to disengage, and 10 minutes later, they'd both been picked off and sunk. Now, if you're 4 ships down in a port battle, and as the attacking fleet, you may have a mortar brig with you, so you're essentially an extra ship down. If you're 4 ships down and the commander is competent, and the fleet has a generally high level of intelligence, they will keep as many of their guns to bear as possible. And then almost no matter how good your opponent is, that 4 or 5 ship delta will mean you're taking an additional 5 broadsides per exchange, and you will lose ships, and you get this snowballing effect where once you're a net of 4 or 5 ships behind, it's incredibly hard. It almost means that the defending fleet has to make a mistake to let you back in the fight, and they didn't make a mistake, and in the end I think the Brits lost 1 and the enemies lost 11. Now I have to say, we saw equally good brawling in some of the other battles. So this was the Brits defending against the French, but here we see a battle, and this is at Caracas, and this is the second battle at Caracas where the Brits, not the night flip, although it seems to be a night map, the British managed to get a full 25 fleet in. And the Danish-Swede-French alliance again came to meet them, somewhat against the wind, again came to meet them. But what's interesting in this port is there's a lot more forts. So there's 2 forts and 3 towers protecting this port. And although the Brits actually knew that, and they brought 2 mortar brigs. Now that was good. 2 mortar brigs is fantastic. But it does mean you're 2 first rates down. And this is the problem with mortar brigs, that You can probably survive being 2 fourth rates down because the firepower to damage ratio, a broadside from a Vic on a Vic or an Ocean on an Ocean or a Santee on a Santee kind of does more damage than a broadside of an Agamemnon on another Aggie, just because the penetration, the armour thickness on the Aggie is sort of overpowered against its own guns. So having 2 mortar brigs is a great idea, and they did manage to kill 2 towers and a fort, I think, from memory. But it does mean you're now 200 gun ships down, you know. So that's you've got 200 less cannons in the battle. Now the Swedes and the French, they came out, and the Danes, they came out, and they met the British-Dutch fleet, or the Dutch-British fleet coming in. And it was very strange watching, because you thought for a moment they were kind of stuffing up, because they all started milling around the coast and letting the Brits come in. But then essentially what they did was they turned around and, staying to the coast, they shepherded the Brits through all the defensive arcs of fire. And in fact, one of the first rates was killed by fort shot. Now, I also have to say in this one, the Brits sent 3 fire ships in, and really only one of them was effective. The other one seemed to have just a ridiculously long fuse. So it sailed into the enemy fleet, all the way through the enemy fleet, and kind of blew up all on its lonely over here. So really, that's not much good at all. And similarly to the Castries battle, this ended up, I think it was maybe 12 or 13 ships sunk. And I think the defenders may have lost 1 ship. And that might have even been a captured ship that they lost. So they were almost unblemished, if not completely unblemished. Now, this again was excellent tactics, because to the Brits as they were coming in, this looked like their opponents were dithering, when in fact what they were doing is drawing them into the fortifications. Now, the 2 mortar brigs, although they earned the Brits quite a lot of points, they earned them like 270 points, I think. I do wonder if the ships lost due to overpower more than made up for that. And then the British using 3 fire ships essentially meant they were down to 20 first rates versus the best part, because there was only 1 ship really damaged by the 3 fire ships. So this was a big win for the defensive fleet, and it was one of these battles that, other than when the battle first came to join, from that point on, from as soon as they started sailing back towards the port, you have to say the defenders never looked in trouble. They just had total control of the battle. So hats off there. Now, the last one, I said I'd talk about this last week. This is Santo Tome de Guiana, which is part of the Orinoco set of islands south of the Windward Islands, on the furthest point of the South American coast that's on the map of naval action as it stands now, probably just above the Portuguese holdings. And of course, this is a bugger of a port to take, because the circles are in a line. So as you can see here, the defenders can join quite far out. So they would automatically get 2 circles. Now in this case, the British screening fleet did really well, and actually made the defenders join quite far back. Not only that, the wind was beautiful. Look at that wind. It's blowing straight down the chuff of Orinoco. And unlike in the 2 of the previous attempts, one of them the wind was very much against the Brits, and by the time they got here, pretty much the Swedes had captured these 2 and got the points locked up. And again, it's not Swedes, it's an alliance fleet, and it's not Brits, it's an alliance fleet. And they pretty much captured 2. In the second attempt, the Brits joined like here, because the pesky French had just popped out of a battle, and the Brits went, oh shit, and quickly joined here. And by the time they got to this circle, it was all over Red Rover. I think that battle was over in 21 minutes, because the Swedes had managed to take all 3 circles before the Brits had even got here. However, this one was perfect storm for the Brits. And like the other 2 battles I'm going in, this is all beautifully rendered in the Nation forum on Games Lab's forums, in the Good Battles and PB reports thread. And this is a honestly, if they had videos for schools back in 1810, this would be absolutely mandatory watching for any fleet commander. Now the Brits did have the wind, so it was always going to be a difficult defence. The British screeners did fantastically, and that made the defence even harder because it meant they couldn't join here. They sort of joined maybe around here. And with this wind, unless it starts turning anti-clockwise, and it doesn't start turning till 30 minutes, unless it starts turning anti-clockwise, the defenders are goosed, basically. Now, the Brits came in and they made fantastic headway. They managed to take the top circle and fully contest the second circle. I'm pretty sure they didn't have a mortar brig because there's only two forts that protect this final circle, and to be honest, the fight here is over the second circle. The attackers will have this circle. The defenders will have this circle. This is where it's won or lost. Now, as the Brits closed in on the alliance, they split their fleet into two lines. And the threat was, so this was the main line driving down, and now my graphics are very straight lines, but these lines have to do dog legs and turns to hold and get into position. But the threat was that this second line would cut the back of the defensive fleet off and basically put 25 ships against about 10, leaving 10 ships pretty much downwind of the battle and impossible to sail back into the fray. Now, it looks simple to sail around here and do a hook turn, but as soon as one ship turns, its speed drops by 2 or 3 knots, and unless everybody in the line sort of reacts, you get this this concertinaing effect where fundamentally ships are clattering in and snapping each other's bowsprits off, or they're having to break out a line formation to hold it. And I have to say the commander nursed the fleet with when to go to battle sails, when to pull up battle sails, at the smallest of changes. The defenders did the only thing they could do, and that was to withdraw with the wind, which means they basically conceded the second circle, and to try and fight in the shadow of their forts, which certainly against the first rates is worked earlier in the week. However, the Brits then just sent their fire ships in. Now, basically the Swedes were pinned up against the land. The fire ships went in, 2 of them went in and did good damage. One of them really reduced the sailing capacity of 4 ships around them, and another one pretty much hurt crew on 5 ships. And then the British, basically, it was, I don't know if you've ever seen the cantilever and horse archers, where they just kind of circle in and come back out, circle in and come back out. And the Brits did this, and in the end, 2/3 of the defending fleet was dispatched, and the battle was handily won by the Brits. So there you go, that's just a bit of a look into how this week we really saw some excellent tactics. I'm sure there were other battles with excellent tactics, it's just that I didn't get to see a video or participate in those. And given that the previous week was kind of a bit crap in that it was really all just made up of lots and lots of boarding, which is sort of valid, but it's also, you know, we're not within naval action, the boarding game is probably the least sexy and advanced part of the game. And we sorry, my wife's having some sort of seizure in the background. And the shooting our cannons through smoke and seeing the fire and the crunch of splinters is what we're in it for. So this week, seeing these tactics was really fantastic, and I was really impressed with the quality of the commanders, and I always am, by the way. If you think you're a port commander wannabe and you'd be Mr. Superpants, I tell you, it is so hard because you have to concentrate on staying alive yourself. You have to understand the direction of the wind and the compass to other captains pointing in other areas. So you need really good spatial awareness. You have to be able to think about where basically your ship and your fleets and your typically your fleet will be broken up into 3 or 4 different parts fighting in different areas. And you have to think, where are they going to be in 5 minutes? Which way is the wind going to be in 5 minutes? And where's the enemy likely to be in 5 minutes from now? And there's really only 10 captains on the server who are in that sort of top grade of port battle commanders. And I'm always amazed at just how savvy these guys are. Now, most of them work with a couple of offsiders who'll help them a little bit with the micromanagement. That's one half. Now, the other half is that you have an intelligent, I mentioned this when I was gibbering about the ports, you have an intelligent fleet. So what does that mean? What it means is if you see a ship that's a bit damaged and it's running away, you need to make the call as to whether or not you're going to be able to catch it and sink it, and whether or not by doing that you're going to expose yourself to being cut off from your fleet in another 20 minutes, which will probably be how long it takes you to catch and dispatch a knackered old ship with nearly full sails. You've got to work out that the ship in front of you looks like it's going to get boarded, and maybe look at interrupting the boarding or stern raking the boarder. Or transversely, you've got to realise that the guy off to your left has started boarding in an opponent's ship, and if you could cover his stern and maybe also rake the opponent while covering the stern, you'll significantly improve his chances. You've got to realise that the ship behind you has got a very weak starboard side, and position yourself perhaps so you're between enemy fire and their starboard and shepherd the other ship a little bit. Now, the port battle commander can't make all these micro decisions. In the battle for Castries, where the British opened the jaws and let the French sail into this doubling effect, if you watch the video, you'll see ships turning, and it's almost formation sailing, where the two of them turn so that and de-accelerate to allow the ship to come between them, and then each time the enemy ship tries to tack away from the sandwich that they're in, one of the ships repositions to essentially go broadside to broadside and shepherd him in. And this is the fleet intelligence, knowing that you're fifth in the line and the guy at the front has started to turn, so knowing that you need to start slowing down now, even though you're still sailing straight and won't need to turn for another minute or so. Telling the person behind you that you've just slowed down, etc., etc., without dominating chat. Knowing when to interrupt the commander to tell him something important, that maybe the fleet's the forts have opened up and the fleet is now in range of the forts, things like this, rather than yelling out "woohoo, I just killed 37 crew" or something like this, and filling the comms with sort of personally important information that is pretty much dribble as far as the fleet itself is concerned. And what we're seeing now across all nations is that sort of the average intelligence of the fleet is improving. And for example, when the Brits had a go at Salam the previous week, and we had 15 captains who hadn't fought in one of the new port battles before, and despite being 3 or 4 ships up on the opponents, we got spanked. And we got spanked because of good commanding from the defender. And it didn't really matter how good the commanding was from the attacker. The commanding from the attacking captain wasn't bad. However, the hive mind of the fleet was simply inferior to the hive mind of the defensive fleet. People knew automatically, there's a ship that's got... A lot of people, as soon as they come broadside with an enemy ship and the cannons are loaded, they'll fire. And that's great, well done, you've got 40 hull hits or whatever. But a smart captain will look at the ship in front of that and the ship behind that and pick on the ship with the most damage done to it. And they'll hold their reload for 30 seconds because it's more important to get a second or a third or a fourth or a fifth broadside into a ship that's damaged. A smart captain, once he's seen an enemy ship that's completely lost one side of armour, will wait for them to repair and then fire one deck at a time. Because if you fire all your decks, they're going to carry on repairing. So you let them repair half a plank, you fire your top deck. You let them repair another half a plank, you fire your middle deck. Their third bit of repair kicks in, you fire your third deck, and by now they've lost all of their repair time or near enough, and if they haven't, your top deck's reloaded. So you can finish a ship off. And equally, if it's getting close to the bell and you need the 40 points or whatever from sinking the ship, a smart captain will know on a ship with open sides to load grape and kill his crew so he has less people on survival, and therefore the ship takes on water quicker. Now, this is stuff no commander can tell. This is sort of the difference between rookie and veteran to some extent. And it's learned. If you recall, 10 weeks ago when the Americans were attacking around here, and they were attacking the Danish fleet. The Danish fleet had just had a huge campaign in this neck of the woods, and all of their captains, first-rate captains, had fought half a dozen battles. And then when the first time the Americans met them, the Americans got their asses kicked. It was boys versus men. But if you watch now where those same fleets have fought, half a dozen times at Islamabad, or half a dozen times at A's or whatever, the American core fleet are veterans now. The commanders obviously got better, as anybody does with experience, but what's more important is the hive mind of the fleet has got smarter. And that's what stood out in those three vids, that are in those three highlights there I just showed you. Where will we see the Biffo next week, I hear you ask? Well, around the Florida Peninsula seems to be a regular knock these days. Haiti gets attacked left, right and centre. The Americans are still clocking on at Ponce in the south, and I think they've even got a battle on the north side. With these ports now all being in Alliance hands, there's only Caracas left. And there's already one port battle set up for that. So that'll be the next one. And of course the French and co will return, no doubt, to attack the British south of the Windward Islands. And so we come to the tally of splinters, sail and blood. And interestingly enough, the Spanish are no longer top of the pops. So this is the first time since the port reset. With the US, they gained some ports and moved into a solid third. With the US taking Islamabad off the Spanish, and the Brits taking the Orinoco region off the Swedes. The Swedes plummet back down to the bottom, and the Brits are now top of the pops on the tally of splinters, sail and blood. So there you go, that's it for this week's naval action. We're still scanning the horizon looking for the next patch. It's been more than 2 months now since we've had a patch. They have added the new test server. The test server does seem to be very much focusing on some new damage mechanics, where it's a more intricate module-based type of damage. I've tried setting up on the test server. It's a bit of a pain for me because each time you switch it downloads 1/4 of a gig, which means nothing to you bastards in the first world, but for those of us deprived souls whose internet is made from dead wombat willies, it's not so good having to do half a gig every time you want to flick between the two. I'm sure you can do some backup trickery, but it's all a bit pesky, to be honest. And that's it for A Letter to the King this week. Give us a like, give us a subscribe. I'll see you on the ocean, and I will catch you.